Every November, roughly 200 million Americans sit down to a meal that feels ancient, timeless, unchanging, handed down since the Pilgrims. Here's the truth. Almost nothing on that table actually comes from 1621. Most of it was invented, popularized, or standardized less than 200 years ago, and in some cases, less than 100. Today, we're going to walk through the real history of 5 dishes that define the Thanksgiving table and cook every single one of them, starting with the bird everyone assumes was always the star. At the actual first Thanksgiving, a 3-day harvest gathering between Plymouth colonists and the Wampanoag in the fall of 1621, historians agree on very few specific foods. The only documented absolutes, according to food historians at Plymouth Patuxet, are wildfowl, corn, and venison. Venison, not turkey, was likely the centerpiece. The Wampanoag brought 5 deer to the gathering. Wild turkey may have been present among the wild fowl mentioned in the one surviving letter describing the event, but it certainly wasn't the star of the show the way it is now. So how did turkey take over the table? Turkey was large enough to feed a big family in one bird, native to North America, and, unlike cows or pigs, not typically raised for daily use, which made it feel special enough for a once-a-year feast. By the 1800s, turkey had become strongly associated with the holiday, cemented further when writer and editor Sarah Josiah Hale spent decades campaigning for a national Thanksgiving holiday and published a specific menu: roast turkey, stuffing, pumpkin pie, and cranberry sauce, that effectively became the template for what Americans still eat today. President Lincoln made the holiday official in 1863, in the middle of the Civil War, partly as an attempt to foster national unity. Hale's menu became the standard almost immediately after. There's something worth sitting with in that timeline. For roughly 240 years after the actual 1621 gathering, there was no fixed, agreed-upon Thanksgiving menu at all. Different states, different regions, and different families ate whatever local harvest and personal tradition dictated. The idea of a single correct Thanksgiving dinner is really a product of print media and wartime politics, far more than it's a product of the Pilgrims themselves. Hale, notably, is also the same person who wrote the nursery rhyme, "Mary Had a Little Lamb," a strange footnote connecting one of America's most enduring poems to one of its most enduring meals. Turkey itself also underwent a transformation most people never think about. The wild turkeys the Wampanoag and colonists might have eaten in 1621 bore little resemblance to the birds on modern tables. They were leaner and considerably more athletic, capable of short bursts of flight that today's broad-breasted domesticated turkeys, bred specifically for meat yield, have almost entirely lost. Now, let's cook one. Classic roast turkey. Ingredients: 1 whole turkey, 12 to 14 pounds, thawed. 1 cup unsalted butter, softened. 2 tablespoons fresh sage, chopped. 2 tablespoons fresh thyme, chopped. 1 lemon, halved. 1 onion, quartered. 4 garlic cloves, smashed. 2 tablespoons salt. 1 tablespoon black pepper, and 2 cups chicken or turkey stock. Preheat oven to 325 degrees Fahrenheit, 163 degrees Celsius. Remove the turkey neck and giblets from the cavity and pat the bird completely dry with paper towels. Dry skin is the key to crisp results. Mix the softened butter with the chopped sage, thyme, salt, and pepper. Gently loosen the skin over the breast and legs and spread about 2/3 of the herb butter directly underneath the skin. Rub the remaining butter over the outside. Stuff the cavity with the lemon halves, quartered onion, and smashed garlic. This isn't traditional bread stuffing, just aromatics to flavor the meat from the inside. Tie the legs together with kitchen twine and tuck the wingtips underneath the body. Place the turkey breast side up on a roasting rack set inside a roasting pan, and pour the stock into the bottom of the pan. Roast for roughly 13 minutes per pound, basting with pan juices every 45 minutes until a thermometer inserted into the thickest part of the thigh reads 165 degrees Fahrenheit, 74 degrees Celsius. Tent with foil if the skin browns too quickly. Let the turkey rest for at least 30 minutes before carving. This step matters more than people think, since cutting too early lets all the juice run straight onto the cutting board instead of staying in the meat. If turkey earned its place through symbolism and scale, stuffing earned its place through pure practicality. Long before it was a beloved holiday tradition, stuffing bread inside a bird was simply a way to avoid wasting anything. Stale bread was expensive to make and too valuable to throw away, so cooks began combining it with herbs, broth, and whatever vegetables were on hand, then packing it into the cavity of a roasting bird, where it would soak up fat and flavor while the meat cooked. Recipes for stuffing, sometimes labeled dressing depending on the region, largely a distinction of whether it was cooked inside the bird or separately in a dish, began appearing regularly in American cookbooks throughout the 1800s. Sage, thyme, and celery became the standard flavor base, and that combination has barely changed since. The regional split between stuffing and dressing is itself a small piece of cultural history. In the American South, stuffing a bird was sometimes considered improper or even unsanitary by certain cookbook authors, so the same basic mixture, baked in its own pan instead of inside the turkey, was renamed dressing to sound more refined. What's genuinely interesting is how little the core idea has changed in roughly 200 years. Modern stuffing recipes swap in cornbread, sausage, chestnuts, or dry fruit depending on the region and the family, but the underlying formula, stale bread, aromatic vegetables, herbs, broth, and fat, is essentially the one being written down in cookbooks before the Civil War. There's also a food safety history hiding inside this dish that most families never think about. Cooking stuffing inside the turkey cavity means the stuffing absorbs flavorful fat and juice as the bird roasts, which is exactly why so many people still prefer it that way. But it also means the stuffing has to reach a safe internal temperature at the same time as the meat around it, which can be tricky given how much denser a turkey's thigh is compared to its cavity. Modern food safety guidance actually recommends baking stuffing separately in its own dish for exactly this reason, which quietly reinforces why dressing, once considered the less proper option in some regional cookbooks, has become the more commonly recommended method today, even outside the South, where it originated as a rebranding. Bread itself carries its own quiet history here too. Colonial and early American households treated bread with a level of respect that's almost unrecognizable today. Flour was labor-intensive to produce, and letting a loaf go to waste was considered wasteful in a way that bordered on irresponsible. Stuffing, in that light, wasn't originally a beloved side dish chosen for its flavor. It was a practical solution to a real economic problem, dressed up over generations into something people now specifically crave once a year. Classic herb stuffing. Ingredients: 1 loaf day-old bread, cut into 1-inch cubes, about 10 cups. Half a cup unsalted butter. 1 large onion diced, 3 celery stalks diced, 2 teaspoons fresh sage chopped, 1 teaspoon fresh thyme chopped, 2 large eggs beaten, 2 cups chicken or turkey stock, salt and pepper to taste, Instructions: preheat oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit, 177 degrees Celsius. Spread the bread cubes on a baking sheet and toast for about 10 minutes until dry but not browned. Set aside. Melt the butter in a large skillet over medium heat. Add the onion and celery and cook for 8 to 10 minutes until softened. Stir in the sage and thyme and cook 1 more minute. In a large bowl, combine the toasted bread cubes with the onion-celery mixture, season with salt and pepper. Whisk the eggs into the stock, then pour over the bread mixture, tossing gently until evenly moistened but not soggy. Transfer to a buttered baking dish, cover with foil, and bake for 30 minutes. Remove the foil and bake another 15 to 20 minutes until the top is golden and slightly crisp. Here's a detail that surprises almost everyone. There were no potatoes at the first Thanksgiving. Not white potatoes, not sweet potatoes. Neither had reached North America's English colonies yet. Potatoes actually originated in South America, cultivated in the Andes for roughly 8,000 years before Spanish colonizers brought them back to Europe in the 1500s. It took even longer for them to cross the Atlantic in the other direction. The first documented potato crop in the American colonies wasn't planted until 1722 in Derry, New Hampshire, more than a century after that first harvest feast. Once potatoes did establish themselves, they spread quickly, largely because they were cheap, filling, and easy to grow in the same New England soil that struggled with other crops. By the 1800s, mashed potatoes had become a fixture of American cooking generally, not just at Thanksgiving, valued for exactly the reasons they're still valued today: comforting, inexpensive, and capable of stretching a modest meal to feed a large table. Their place at Thanksgiving specifically solidified alongside turkey and stuffing as part of the broader 19th century move toward a standardized, affordable holiday meal that ordinary families, not just wealthy ones, could realistically put together. It's a small reminder that traditional often just means whatever became popular and stuck, rather than anything ancient or original. Mashed potatoes are one of the newest arrivals on a table people assume has looked the same since colonial times. Potatoes also had an image problem to overcome before they became beloved. When they first arrived in Europe from South America, many people regarded them with real suspicion. Some believed they were poisonous, since potatoes belonged to the nightshade family alongside genuinely toxic plants, and others associated them with leprosy due to their knobby, unfamiliar appearance. It took centuries, active government campaigns in several European countries, and repeated famines that made potatoes' reliability undeniable before they were widely accepted as safe, ordinary food rather than a suspicious import. By the time potatoes reached American Thanksgiving tables in a mashed form specifically, that suspicion had long faded, replaced by exactly the opposite reputation. Potatoes became the emblem of humble, dependable, working family cooking. Mashing them with butter and cream rather than serving them boiled or roasted added just enough richness to feel appropriate for a holiday table without requiring the kind of expensive, hard-to-source ingredients that might exclude poorer families from participating in the same standardized meal Sarah Josiah Hale had been promoting. It's also worth noting that mashed potatoes solved a practical hosting problem that turkey alone couldn't. A single roasted bird, however large, only stretches so far across a table of hungry relatives. A pot of mashed potatoes, made from a handful of cheap, easily stored tubers, could reliably fill in the gaps, one of the quiet reasons this particular side dish became so universally embraced across income levels, regions, and generations, regardless of what else happened to be on the table that year. Classic mashed potatoes. Ingredients: 3 pounds russet or Yukon Gold potatoes, peeled and cubed, half a cup of unsalted butter, 3/4 of a cup of warm whole milk or cream, 1 teaspoon salt plus more to taste, half a teaspoon black pepper. Instructions: place the cubed potatoes in a large pot and cover them with cold water by about an inch, add a generous pinch of salt. Bring to a boil, then reduce to a simmer and cook for 15 to 20 minutes until a fork slides through the potatoes with no resistance. Drain thoroughly and return the potatoes to the hot, empty pot for 1 minute to let excess steam escape. This prevents watery mashed potatoes. Add the butter and mash with a potato masher or ricer until mostly smooth. Gradually stir in the warm milk until the texture you prefer. Some like it slightly chunky, others silky smooth. Season with salt and pepper to taste and serve immediately. Cranberries themselves are genuinely native to the region. They grew wild in New England bogs long before European colonists arrived, and Native American communities used them for food, medicine, and dye. But cranberry sauce, specifically the sweetened, jellied version most people picture, is a much newer invention, and its rise to Thanksgiving table status came through a surprisingly specific set of historical moments. Because sugar was scarce and expensive for early colonists, there was no sweet cranberry sauce in 1621. The tartness of raw cranberries would have been far too intense to serve as a side dish the way we do now. The pairing of cranberries with turkey and onions first shows up in print in the 1796 cookbook American Cookery, generally considered the first cookbook written by an American and published in America. Cranberry sauce got a significant boost in visibility during the Civil War when General Ulysses S. Grant reportedly ordered cranberries included in Union troops' Thanksgiving meal in 1864, a detail that helped cement the pairing in the national imagination at exactly the moment Lincoln's new holiday was taking hold. The final piece of the story is almost aggressively modern. Jellied cranberry sauce, the smooth, can-shaped version millions of families still serve today, wasn't commercially available until 1912, which directly led to the founding of Ocean Spray shortly after. That distinctive ridged cylinder shape isn't a coincidence or a design choice. It's simply the shape of the can it comes from, immortalized as traditional by pure market familiarity. There's a genuinely funny cultural split hiding inside this dish, too. Survey after survey shows American households roughly divided between people who insist on homemade cranberry sauce, made with whole or roughly chopped berries, and people who consider the canned jellied version, complete with the visible ring marks from the can, the only acceptable option, sometimes as a point of nostalgia rather than a genuine preference for taste. Neither side is more authentic than the other in any historical sense. Both versions are well under 100 years old, and the canned version is barely over a century old. What actually separates them is which specific decade of family tradition each household happened to inherit, not which one is somehow more original. Cranberries themselves also carry an unusual physical trait that helped cement their place at the harvest table specifically. Unlike most fruit, they float because of small internal air pockets, which historically made them easy to harvest by flooding bogs and skimming the berries off the surface, a method still used by commercial growers today, and one that produces those famous videos of bright red cranberries floating on flooded fields every autumn. That same floating trait, incidentally, is how cranberries earn their spot as one of the few genuinely native North American fruits still central to a major national holiday. Blueberries and Concord grapes are also native, but neither ever became as closely tied to a single specific meal the way cranberries did, largely thanks to that one 1796 cookbook pairing, one wartime order from a general, and one canning company's decision over a century later to put the sauce in a can shaped exactly like the mold home cooks had already been using for decades. Fresh cranberry sauce. Ingredients: 12 ounces fresh cranberries, 1 cup granulated sugar, 1 cup water or orange juice, 1 teaspoon orange zest, optional, a pinch of cinnamon, optional. Instructions: combine the cranberries, sugar, and water or orange juice in a medium saucepan over medium-high heat. Bring to a boil, then reduce heat and simmer for about 10 minutes, stirring occasionally. You'll hear the cranberry start to pop. That's exactly what you want. Continue simmering until the mixture thickens and most of the berries have burst, about 5 more minutes. Stir in the orange zest and cinnamon if using. Remove from heat and let cool. The sauce will continue to thicken as it cools. Refrigerate for at least an hour before serving. It keeps well for up to a week and also freezes nicely. We've saved the most impossible dish for last. Impossible in 1621, that is. Pumpkins themselves were absolutely present. They were a staple of indigenous agriculture throughout the Americas long before colonization, and early colonists adopted pumpkin as a survival food almost immediately. But pumpkin pie, specifically, simply could not have existed at that first feast. The Plymouth colony had no wheat flour and no butter to make a crust, no sugar in any meaningful quantity, and, this detail tends to surprise people most, hadn't yet built an oven capable of baking one. Pumpkin, in its early colonial form, was mostly baked whole in the ashes of a fire or boiled and mashed, eaten more like a simple side dish than a dessert. Pie versions began appearing on New England tables by the early 1700s, once proper ovens, reliable butter and flour supplies, and enough sugar were all available in the same kitchen at the same time. One 1705 town record from Colchester, Connecticut, even shows Thanksgiving itself being delayed by a full week because a molasses shortage made it impossible to bake the pies everyone was expecting. By the time Sarah Josepha Hale published her standardized Thanksgiving menu in the 1800s, pumpkin pie was already firmly established as the holiday's signature dessert, prized for using a genuinely native, autumn-harvested ingredient in a dish that felt distinctly, deliberately American compared to the fruit pies more associated with English tradition. There's a small irony worth noting here, too. Pumpkin pie, more than any other dish on this table, is often cited as the most authentic Thanksgiving food precisely because pumpkins were genuinely present at that first 1621 feast, and yet the pie itself is arguably the least authentic dish of the entire meal, given how many decades passed and how many essential ingredients had to arrive before it could actually exist in the form we know it today. The raw ingredient is ancient, the finished dish is comparatively recent. It's also worth mentioning that pumpkin itself is something of a loose culinary category rather than one specific plant. Most canned pumpkin puree today, and much of what colonial cooks would have called pumpkin, actually comes from a broader family of winter squash, selected over generations for smooth texture and mild sweet flavor, rather than strict botanical accuracy. The name has stuck for centuries, longer than the precise definition ever has. Classic pumpkin pie. Ingredients: 1 unbaked 9-inch pie crust, 15-ounce can pumpkin puree, or 2 cups fresh pumpkin puree, 3/4 cup granulated sugar, 1 teaspoon ground cinnamon, 1/2 teaspoon ground ginger, 1/4 teaspoon ground cloves, 1/2 teaspoon salt, 2 large eggs, 1/2 cup of heavy cream. Instructions: preheat oven to 425 degrees Fahrenheit, 218 degrees Celsius. Fit the pie crust into a 9-inch pie dish and crimp the edges. In a large bowl, whisk together the pumpkin puree, sugar, cinnamon, ginger, cloves, and salt until smooth. Whisk in the eggs one at a time, then stir in the heavy cream until fully combined. Pour the filling into the crust and bake at 425 degrees Fahrenheit for 15 minutes, then reduce the oven temperature to 375 degrees Fahrenheit, 177 degrees Celsius, and continue baking for 40 to 50 minutes until the center is just barely set. A slight jiggle in the middle is fine, since it will finish setting as it cools. Cool completely on a wire rack at least 3 hours before slicing. Serve with whipped cream. And that's the table. 5 dishes, none of them as old as most people assume, each one shaped less by the Pilgrims than 19th century cookbook authors, wartime symbolism, and, in Cranberry sauce's case, the literal shape of a tin can. What ties them together isn't ancient tradition. It's that somewhere along the way, each one became good enough, practical enough, or symbolic enough that families kept making it year after year until it stopped feeling invented at all and started feeling like it had simply always been there. If you enjoyed learning the story behind your favorite holiday dishes, Quiet Kitchen brings you the history and the recipe behind classic American cooking, both old and new. Subscribe for more.